my perspective on the whole thing with the youth is that if we were born with this ability, which Russell Target, SRI International said we were, then how did we get here with that ability? And why were we given that ability? And why and what was the catalyst that started the process of making sure that we didn't speak that language or realize that ability? I have my own long-term theories on all of that, but that's not what we're talking about here right now.
Well, no, I mean, if you could succinctly categorize that, I mean, I think it's definitely within the realm.
If there was one of the, as soon as organized religion began to structure itself and establish its footing and its power, it was there for one reason, and it was to control masses, right? To allegedly bring order and peace and stability and those kinds of things. But we all know that has never been, what religion ultimately does. It may do good things on some levels, but it is also the cause of great wars and conflict and massive death, etc. It is also one of the things that has caused taking just a simple human being born with disability to be capable of seeing, understanding, feeling, hearing beyond the physical, that they are connected to something beyond the physical. Always have been and always will be. But that jeopardized the principal tenets of organized religion. You cannot stand up in any way and say that you are omnipotent, omniscient, omnipresent, eternal, because that destroys the end goal of organized religion, right? Those are all words used for if you follow the tenets of our belief structure and do so unquestionably and do whatever we ask you to do on a basis of faith, sight unseen, that you will be these things after you die. But what we know is that we are born as those things. And that is a weird concept for organized religion to have to face. I don't know if that came in the very beginning when people started to see this developing in children and others. It certainly would make sense, right? That you start to see that, and you start to see maybe warriors who are spinning a Boyd cycle faster because they're connected. You maybe see something else. It doesn't mean that because we have that ability that everybody's good and there is no evil. Certainly those both elements are there and everything in between. So I don't know what the motivation was for the creation of these organized religion. I will tell you my belief structure is that it wasn't God. I mean, God didn't come down here and say, form this church and form that church. And by the way, it's okay if that one spins off and becomes something slightly different. I stopped believing that a long time ago. But what I do believe is that something placed us here. I mean, we were here. We did not rise up out of primordial ooze. That I can tell you as a scientist, that didn't happen. If it happened, they would be recreating that in primordial ooze, right? They would be creating chemically, biologically that and seeing what they could raise up out of there. And they can't, and they won't. And they can't replicate that experiment. It's just a statement.
I think they're able to produce protenoids or something like that, but that's about as far as they were able to get. I think it was like Yale. I can't remember. But anyway,
single cell life or proteins or something else. Yeah. But not creating anything that even comes close to sprouting legs and coming up out of the,
Yeah, going from something very basic to extreme complexity is entropy works in the opposite direction.
Exactly. So that's how I understand that. I mean, I realize that just kind of the legions of the status quo, in that I mean religion has been probably one of the dominant forces in trying to tamp this down in humanity and saying, it's not you. You can't do that. Don't talk like that. Then it becomes, it's blasphemy, sacrilegious. You can't say those things. And I know, having been a high priest in the Mormon church, I know that people do that. I've seen it. I've heard it. One of my last times that I ever stood at the pulpit of the church, I was asked to stand up as a high priest and talk about, I think it was the law of tithing or something else. And I stood up and I talked about the inner sanctum, the holy of holies that I talked about earlier, about the portal opening and that kind of stuff. And I could feel the stake president who was behind me kicking me in the ankle. He was like slouching down in his chair, kicking me in the ankle, meaning stop talking about that. And I just kept talking about it. And I gave my whole presentation of like 40 minutes with my ankle being kicked by this guy behind me. And when it was over, and in the Mormon church, you finish every lecture or sermon like that as with amen, and the amens that came back were mixed. So, and afterwards, when I went down, because I just was not going to engage in religious pablum anymore. This wasn't going to do it. I was not. I was in it long enough that I realized that the message being given was this really dumbed down message designed to feed the masses, enough pablum each Sunday to get them to the next Sunday. It was the same message over and over, hitting on the same things. All the Sunday school manuals, everything were always the same thing, right? The same message just being repeated. Year after year after year, that was just restructured, turned around. This taken from the back, put up in the front, back and forth. And I was analytical enough to look at that and then be very displeased with that and understand it was a tool. It was a tool being used to do something, and it wasn't a tool being used to inspire, uplift, and allow people to become or realize, what their purpose is in this life, what their calling is in this life, which is the thing you do to honor your purpose, or what what they were going to use as a lens to define them. Some people call that a primary question. And so many people don't know what that is. And often the primary question is a very limiting thing that people come up with. I can tell you what mine was coming up through school. When I was a young man, they discovered I was grossly dyslexic in the second grade, after I'd been called retarded by a second grade teacher because I couldn't read. We had just come back from Germany, and I'm standing in this place, and I couldn't read. I didn't know what it meant. It just looked like gibberish to me. This teacher made sure I got laughed at and called retarded. And then I had to get tested for intelligence, and they concluded that that was completely ass backwards. And so my father, bless his heart, man, my father basically like flipped them all off and took me to Lawrence Livermore Air Force Base, where there was a young Air Force major there, a psychologist who was becoming one of the experts, preeminent experts in dyslexia and defining it and finding solutions around it. I was in there as a young second grade kid around airmen that were there that had been determined to be dyslexic. So they're in the Air Force, but they did not read well, and they were doing this stuff. So I was in and out of that for about 2 years, and I learned how to read. I learned, kind of a photographic process for being a rapid recognition dyslexic person. It wasn't called that back then. A rapid recognition dyslexia. And I also found that I had an audio dyslexia, which means that people can say things to you and you don't hear exactly what they said. You hear something different. And I learned very quickly, moving up through higher education and things, I don't raise my hand if somebody asks a question. If a professor asks a question, my hand doesn't go up because I'm unsure that I actually heard the question correctly. So I have to let somebody else answer the question and then piece it together that, that was the question. And now there's the answer. You learn those tricks as you move through life with that inability to read and hear perfectly like other people do. It's not difficult in the military because most of what we hear in the military is what? The same thing, right? Right. There are a few variations in it. And when there are variations, there's always somebody to ask, or there are briefbacks, right? That can happen. It just didn't ever seem to be a problem there. So that is why my personal opinion as to why this ability was shunted and closed down, because it didn't meet the objective of certain things. Otherwise, Why would it have been shut down, stripped away? Why would we not want the youth of this planet to recognize that ability? If they did, how different might this world be, this global society? I mean, I'm not trying to be philosophical about that, but how different would it be if abilities that physicists at SRI determined we are born with, and that all of these pediatric psychiatrists and psychologists have determined as well, that there is something that we are born with that gives us a knowledge of beyond the physical. So that was a powerful statement that came out of SRI, and I'm really grateful to Russell Targ for having said that on multiple occasions. The third question I already addressed, they were not going to be able to develop a training program.
If you enjoyed this video, please hit the like, subscribe, and notification buttons. Additionally, if you have any feedback, please put something in the comments below. And lastly, if you want to watch the full episode of this clip, you can find it above. Thanks again for watching.